The S&P 500 is an index, meaning group of stocks, which are the biggest 500 companies on the stock market. So if you go to the stock market and you pick out the 500 biggest companies by market cap, meaning the valuation of these companies, this gives you the S&P 500. Now, instead of you going out and individually investing in all 500 of these companies, you can invest in something like VOO or SPY. These are the ticker symbols for the ETFs. If you invest in either one of these, you are now indirectly investing in all 500 of these companies because VOO and SPY both invest in the S&P 500. They give you exposure to the S&P 500, the biggest 500 companies on the stock market. Now, when it comes time for you to actually invest your money into an ETF, there are three big questions you always want to ask. The first question is, who made the ETF? Second is, what do these ETFs actually invest in and what percentage of each company? And third is fees, because you don't want to give all your money to fees. And so you got to understand these three questions to help you understand where you should actually put your money. So let's start talking here. Who made this ETF? VOO is an ETF made by Vanguard, and SPY is an ETF made by Spider, SPDR, they're pronounced Spider. But these are two different companies, both investment companies that create ETFs, which allow you to now buy ETFs. Both Vanguard and Spider are both very reputable companies. And so when it comes time for you to actually research ETFs, you want to look at how credible is the company that created the ETF, because you're going to have a whole bunch of newer, no-name companies releasing ETFs and index funds all the time. But if they have no credibility, they have no history, you don't want to just dump your money into them, because what if they go bust? So you want to look at who made this ETF, Vanguard and the Spider, and also along with that, how many people are actually investing their money into these ETFs? How big are these ETFs? The easiest way to find that information is just to go onto the Vanguard website or the Spider website and actually look at these ETFs. They'll have a fact sheet that will give you a bunch of information, everything you need to know about the ETF itself. So if you go onto the Vanguard website, here I'm on the VOO page, and you see it says the fund total net assets, which is $829 billion for VOO. And then if I come onto the Spider website under index statistics, it says the weighted average market cap, which is currently 668 million, which is $668 billion. If you search online, the general rule of thumb is if you're investing in an ETF, you want to look for an ETF that has at least $10 million in market cap of actually assets that are being managed in order for it to be an actual worthwhile investment to protect your money. But I like to look at something a little bit safer, especially if it's an ETF, because I want my money to be safe. So I'm looking at least $100 million on the low end of assets under management. And both of these in the hundreds of billions are way past that. So we know that one, they're made by a company that's credible, and second, that they have enough assets under management for it to be an okay investment. The second question you want to ask yourself is, what companies do these two ETFs invest in? So we know that both of these ETFs give you exposure to the S&P 500, meaning they both invest in the same 500 companies, but they don't invest in the same 500 companies with the same ratios. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going back onto the Vanguard website, and right now I can see that the 10 largest holdings are number 1, Microsoft, number 2, Apple, number 3, Alphabet, which is Google, 4, Amazon, Tesla, and on and on and on. But if I go to SPY, I'm going to see here at the top holdings, number 1 is Apple. Number 2 is Microsoft. Number 3 is Amazon. Number 4 is Tesla. Number 5 is Alphabet. So you can see it's very similar companies, but what you see is that the percentages are different, because in SPY, Apple is the number 1 holding versus in Vanguard, Microsoft is the number 1 holding. This question is going to have a lot bigger implications in the other ETFs that I talk about, because those other ETFs are going to be investing in different companies and different types of companies. But in this case, both of these ETFs are investing in the same companies, just in a different ratio and a different percentage of each one. So you can take a look at them, see what their top holdings are, and see which ones you like better. Now, in general, you don't need to spend a ton of time trying to get into the nitty-gritty of each individual company in these ETFs, because the whole point of investing your money into an ETF is for it to be passive. And so you just want to get a kind of general idea of which companies that they're investing in, and if you like the companies, then the ETF might be a good investment for you. And the third question you want to ask before you invest your money into any ETF or index fund or mutual fund or really any investment is, what are the fees. So in general, ETFs have much lower fees than something like a mutual fund because these ETFs are passively managed. So a mutual fund, which is something that a lot of people are familiar with, is when you invest your money into this fund, but it's managed by a person, this money manager. And because it's actively managed by a person, their goal is now trying to beat the market, and they're also going to charge you a lot higher fees. And the problem with that is, sure, they're trying to beat the market, but over the long term, most money managers cannot beat the market year after year after year, so you end up actually losing because you also have to pay much higher fees on top of all of that. Now, there are some instances where a mutual fund can be beneficial if you can get access to the right mutual fund, but in general, that's the thing that you got to be aware of. With ETFs, generally, you have much lower fees because now they're passively managed, meaning that they're managed by a computer. So a computer is going to look at the index, they're going to look at the rules. The rules are here that it's investing in the biggest 500 companies on the stock market. So if a company becomes smaller than one of these top 500 companies, the computer is going to kick that company out and add in a new company. So it's very passive, which is why your fees are less, but you still want to pay attention to what the fees are. The way you do that is by looking at the expense ratio, and here on the Vanguard website, you'll see that the VOO expense ratio is 0.03%, and on the SPDR Spider website, you'll see that the gross expense ratio is 0.0945%. So the expense ratio or fees for VOO and SPY are both extremely low, but the SPY fees or expense ratio is about 3 times higher than VOO, but relatively, they're both very, very, very little. I mean, an expense ratio of 0.03% means that if you invest $1,000, your fees are going to be 30 cents for every $1,000 that you invest, and an expense ratio of 0.09% means that your fees are going to be 90 cents for every $1,000 that you invest. So both very, very little. Now, the reason why I talk about investing in the S&P 500 ETF is because this is a way for you to get general exposure to the stock market. You're just investing in the biggest 500 companies in the stock market, and now if the stock market goes up, your fund will typically go up. If the stock market goes down, your fund will also typically go down. But this is a way for you to grow and compound your money because now you're just investing your money in the market and letting the market do its thing. So if the economy continues to grow and the market continues to grow, well, now your money's growing and compounding because you have exposure to the general market. You're getting exposure to the American economy and the American stock market. And this is one of the most accessible ways to do that because you're just investing in the biggest 500 companies on the market. If you enjoyed this clip and you want to continue your financial education journey, I have another video that I think you'll love. All you got to do is click that button right over there. And for those of you who want to stay up to date on the top finance and business news, you can join Market Briefs, my free financial newsletter, by clicking that button below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.